Hello and welcome. I'm here today with the MSI Stealth 18HX AI laptop for 2025 featuring the 5070 Ti. Now this was a model that I wanted to get my hands on all of last year, but I was not able to get to it because it was simply not available in my region in Canada. Before we begin, just a quick disclaimer here. This laptop was purchased with my own money. All of the content you hear in this video will be entirely my own, and nobody has been privy to editorial review of the content herein. If you like my content, please click subscribe, please click the like button, and click the notification bell so you're the first to know when there's no new content available here. And let's begin into this review. So looking at this laptop, there's no doubt that this is a large size laptop. This is an 18-inch device and it has some serious heft. Now compare this to a more typical 16-inch laptop. If you're looking for something that is going to be a desktop replacement or a true behemoth gaming device, in terms of a portable form factor, there is still some portability into this factor. This is going to be the lightest 18-inch gaming laptop that you can buy in 2025 currently. So this one weighs roughly 6 pounds and a little bit change, or 2.89 kilograms, just under there. And despite that, this is a pretty premium build. It's a pretty hefty device, a little bit tough to hold with one hand, but it's got plastic on the bottom here, metal lid on the top here, and it's got a very nice keyboard deck with a full-size 99 key keyboard. You have everything kind of smashed together with the gap here being removed and the navigational keys being moved up here. You also get dual biometric authentication in terms of a fingerprint reader and also a Windows IR cam here with a physical shutter button. You have a very nice large trackpad, 2 speakers up top, 4 speakers on the bottom, so a total of 6 speakers here. Sounds fantastic. And in terms of the port selection here, it is actually quite well equipped. On the right hand side here, we got 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports here with a full-size SD card slot. On the rear of this device here, we have a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet jack, a full-size HDMI 2.1 directly wired to the 5070 Ti, and this is the proprietary power connector here, the square reversible power connector for MSI, and just some heat venting here. So lots of basically gamer designer and aesthetic there. So on the right-hand side, we get 2 USB Type A ports. These are 3.2 Gen 2, so 10 gigabit speeds, and a headphone and microphone jack here with a Kensington lock slot here towards the back. We also have some exhaust here. So there's heat exhaust on the sides and also on the rear of this device. And because this is a pretty thin laptop here, one caveat to this laptop's design is that you have extremely tall rubber feet here that really jut out. If you look at these ones on the rear in particular, it's quite noticeable. So despite having a vapor chamber in here, we have 2 very large fans here that move a lot of air. We'll talk about that in the thermal section as to how the performance is in terms of heat, the fan noise, and how you can expect in terms of wattages and all that sort of stuff on this laptop. But this is something to take note. So if you sit with this laptop on your lap, you will certainly feel these digging into your knees because this is a pretty heavy laptop. And to my surprise, it was still able to fit into my standard 17-inch laptop size bag. That can't be said for all 18-inch laptops, and a definite sizable bezel at the bottom of the display here. If those were removed, this would become much more compact, and the Razer Blade 18 exhibits that compactness, which gives it a very premium feel, I believe, for an 18-inch gaming laptop, almost in the form factor and size of a 17.3-inch laptop. Because you have this black metal chassis and deck here, you're going to get lots of fingerprints. This thing is a fingerprint magnet. You do get this lip up front here, so it allows you to open up the display. However, keep in mind, because the display is heavy, being large, 18 inches in size, it doesn't quite hold as low as you would hope. So you'd have to kind of keep it there. But one hand opening is quite easy. It's well balanced. 99 watt hour battery up front here. Magnesium aluminum chassis is the material they've used here. Overall, a very good design, very well equipped for features, very well equipped for ports, beautiful keyboard layout, per key RGB. It's got all of the right stats and figures. Let's talk about how the overall usability is of this laptop. All right, let's take a look under the hood here. So this is the MSI Stealth 18 HXAI. So as we look at the keyboard deck here, because we've got a nice 18-inch size laptop here, we got a very sizable and very roomy deck here for the keyboard and for the actual trackpad, etc. Now, some of the niceties about this trackpad here is that this is a glass surface, so multi-touch gestures here are quite smooth. It's very easy to do. MSI doesn't really state what is the material, but I would assume that it's a glass material. It certainly does not feel like plastic or like Mylar, which I'm very familiar with on the Lenovo devices here. I would go as far as to guess that this is a glass trackpad. And pressing down, There's no rattle whatsoever. It is certainly smooth. It feels solid, and it's nice to track on. However, there is one caveat here about the trackpad. When you are actually gaming or using the keyboard and typing like so, it's quite easy to press on here because it is centered, whereas the keyboard itself is not actually, or excuse me, the trackpad isn't centered under the keyboard itself. Rather, it's centered on the actual deck of the laptop itself. That means it's a little bit off to the right. So when you're typing like so, particularly if you like to rest your palms while you're typing, you're going to have this issues where you're accidentally activating the screen or pressing other buttons. But during gaming, because your hand is here on the mouse and on the WAS keys, it's not really an issue during gaming. And of course, you have a handy feature here. You can just press F4 or function F4 if you've got your media keys toggled to disable the trackpad, and then at point, doesn't matter, you can type all day and it's not going to be an issue. I have a fingerprint reader, so we have biometric authentication here in two different forms. Thank you, MSI. In 2025, we should not have any laptops that do not give you multiple levels of biometric authentication. So we have here not only fingerprint reader, but up at the top, we'll look at it a little bit later in the display section, we also have a Windows IR capable camera, which means we can do Windows Hello authentication and face unlock as well of this laptop. The keyboard itself is a SteelSeries tuned, not a mechanical, it's a traditional keyboard, but it's a full-size keyboard with 99 keys actually. So you have all of the functions and everything that you expect from a typical size keyboard, but everything is kind of, smashed together. And because of the 18-inch deck here, we don't have shortened or, squished keys here for the numpad. The numpad keys are actually full size. Beautiful. That is actually very, very usable. We do also have some navigation keys up here. Insert, delete, home, etc., are relegated to the top of the keyboard function row here. That said, we get 1.7 millimeters of key travel per MSI, and it says here that we have per key RGB lighting here tuned by SteelSeries. The RGB looks great, and the WAS keys are translucent, and on the function keys you have some additional functionality here that you can control just by using the function and the arrow key shortcuts. And the other thing is, if you press the function key, you not only get a display indicator on the actual screen, but you also get highlighted in red the actual function keys, the media keys that you're going to use, and of course the functions that are available to you on the arrow keys itself. So with the arrow keys, you have media playback and pause. You have fan control, which will basically turn your fans up to max. You have a target button here that basically gives you a on-screen crosshair, and you have a display off button. Now, that to me was a little bit off-putting. Why would you want to turn off the display? But then again, if you're using this on an external monitor and you want to play, on your external display and kind of have this in a docked mode or a lid closed mode, turning off the display will reduce not only the power consumption, but also the heat buildup overall in the closed chassis of this device. Because it is 18-inch, it's very comfortable to type on. It feels like you're sitting actually on a desk with your hands placed and the palms on this actually deck. You feel like you're actually typing on a desktop keyboard. That is a very great size. And these edges here at the corners of the deck are actually nicely beveled, so they don't feel, sharp at all. And I've used it like this for a couple hours here, gaming and typing, etc. And it doesn't start to dig into your arms where you start to say, oh man, this is uncomfortable and I need to take a break. Or that said, around the keyboard deck itself, we also have two speakers here. Now this device has 6 speakers overall. We have 2 top firing speakers, we have 2 subwoofers and 2 additional speakers which are bottom firing. This device gets very, very loud. This is the first Dynaudio set of speakers that I've listened to in an MSI device where I've said, wow, this is really good audio. Now let's talk about the one issue that I have with this particular keyboard. Now I'm going to disable the noise cancellation on my mic and set this here on the keyboard deck. What I want to point out with this particular keyboard, which surprised me a little bit, I did not expect this to happen, is that when you're actually typing, there's a bit of a hollow sound, particularly from this section, the center section of this keyboard here. So when you're typing on this section of the keyboard, there's almost a ringing to this key. So let me see if I can demonstrate that. I have this on a nice and sturdy desk here, so I don't know why that would be the case. And considering that this is an 18-inch chassis, has a vapor chamber, lots of metal, it's very, very solid and sturdy. There's no real flex in this device. I'm surprised that there is this hollowish kind of ringing to the keyboard when you actually type on this keyboard. I noticed this yesterday. I noticed this again today. I thought maybe, I was hallucinating or just overexhausted, but it is indeed present. It's very hard to show on the mic, but it's certainly present in person, and I've noticed it numerous times typing on this keyboard. I don't know why that is. Perhaps there's something loose in this particular unit, or I really can't explain it, but that is something that I've noticed, and I wanted to point out so you guys are aware of it. Looking at the refresh rate of this display here, we've got the 1600p model on the 5070 Ti equipped Stealth 18. However, if you step up to the 5080 or the 5090 versions, at least in Canada, you will get the full 4K 3840 by 2400, I believe, 16 by 10 aspect ratio UHD mini LED display. When we unplug the battery, it kind of toggles the display down and it switches over to 60 Hz to preserve that battery life. Let's demonstrate that here. We'll unplug. And we'll see here that there is a flash. The screen swaps over to 60 Hertz. Nice to see that that is built into the actual laptop here, whether it's done by the MSI Center software or whatnot. This is a handy feature to have, and some of the laptops still in 2025 have not implemented this feature. And let's talk about the actual color reproduction and content consumption on this display. So we'll do a little bit here on the specs here. As I mentioned, this is an 18-inch panel, 16 by 10 aspect ratio, QHD plus resolution, which is 2560 by 1600. It is 240 Hertz in the refresh rate, and it has 100% DCI-P3 color gamut coverage, and it is an IPS panel here. This looks visually stunning, and it gets plenty bright, so you're not going to have any issues with overcoming any type of indoor light. However, MSI doesn't actually give the specifications for the actual display's brightness. I would gander to say that this is about 400 nits, but the colors here look absolutely bang on. They look absolutely stunning, and because it's a matte display panel, there's really no glare here whatsoever. You're going to get very, very high fidelity in terms of everything that you're looking at on the display. If we plug in our laptop again, we'll wait for the swap. Now running at 240 Hertz, it smooths out further. So now there is zero stutter whatsoever. There's a little bit perhaps being exhibited here, but I think that's because the actual refresh rate of the actual video itself, the CPU and the GPU, etc. It does take a moment once you plug in the power adapter to kind of toggle everything back on and to cycle the hardware up to the higher refresh rates, but this looks absolutely smooth. The greens are visually very green, the whites are very white. It has enough of a contrast ratio as well that you're really going to enjoy this display for any kind of content. If you buy this laptop as your primary desktop replacement, or your primary use for this is going to be content consumption, content creation, or even gaming, you're going to love this laptop. And now let's take a look at the overall brightness. So if we adjust all the way down here, this is 0% brightness. The display is still, very usable at this brightness level. If you have indoor lighting, as I have the studio lighting above, you can actually use it at this level if you're working late at night, I suppose. But at around 50%, this looks very, very good. It's saturated enough. The colors look visually, apparent. The snow here, I can distinguish the different areas of the snow and the snow piles. I don't lose really much contrast. If you turn it up though, you get a little bit more definition in the shadows there. But at 50%, this is a very, very usable display. And finally, to demonstrate the actual backlight bleed of this panel here, we'll turn off the overhead lighting and we'll let you see this laptop boot up. So a bit of backlight bleed here, very small amount on the right hand bottom corner and a little bit in the center bottom corner, also in the left. It looks like along the bottom edge of the display here, there's a little bit of backlight bleed happening. I would not have expected that actually of a premium laptop such as this, but during normal operation, it's not evident whatsoever, and certainly not during gaming sessions. Okay, so here we are in Titan Quest, and we're playing on this display here at 240 Hertz refresh rate, and we're getting about 43 frames per second in the Epic preset here with DLLA enabled. DLLA basically brings any laptop GPU down to its knees, but fidelity is extreme. I would say absolutely extreme. This looks the most what is the word here? This looks the most stunning that you can get in terms of the display quality. Let's enable here our frame generation, and we'll show that this can actually run quite fast. So we'll enable 4x frame generation in this game. Also nice to see that multi-frame generation is supported out of the box. And here we go. Now we're playing 150 frames per second, absolutely buttery smooth here. The full-size SD card here of the SD Express 7.0 that's included gives some very good write speeds, and it inserts almost all the way into the device, sticking out maybe about 20%. Not going to be easy to snap that off. You're getting very good read performance at about 150 megabytes per second, which is fantastic for content creators and those who need to do photography alike. Look at the SSD, we've got some pretty good read performance. There are 2 slots on board, both of the Gen 4 variety, allowing you to add another SSD so you can expand the storage. Now with larger drives, you can potentially go all the way up to 8 terabyte dual-sided drives, although do check the heights of your drives to ensure that they're going to be compatible and be able to fit into the chassis of this device. And finally, if you look here at the webcam, it is very nice to have a physical shutter button up top here, so you know when you're physically have the webcam disabled or hidden out of view for privacy and to ensure that nobody's peeking on you when you don't want it. This is a test of the video quality from the 1080p 30 FPS IR enabled Windows Hello capable webcam from the MSI Stealth 18 HX AI for 2025. Boy, that is a mouthful here. Let me know what you think of the video quality and overall the audio quality from the built-in mics and the noise cancellation. Thanks to this being a Copilot Plus PC, that means we can use Windows Studio effects such as this one here. So I can toggle on portrait mode, which will basically blur out my background, giving a focus to your speaker. And you can also go and toggle on eye contact and automatic framing, which will basically zoom in the camera to try and focus the user, as they appear on the webcam. So what do you think of this AI-enabled and AI-capable Windows Hello webcam? And for those of you who are audio creators, I ran the latency mod test on here to see what the audio latency would be like, and it looks like we got some very good results here. So those of you into audio production, music production, DJing, and things of the sort will definitely be able to use this laptop for those particular use cases here. So you can pause the video and have a look at the actual performance here. And as you'd expect here from the latest laptop, you've got Wi-Fi 7 on board with tri-band antenna, so you should get some very, very good Wi-Fi performance. Sadly, I don't have a Wi-Fi 7 device to test this out. And of course, the latest generation of Bluetooth with version 5.4 is included as well. The CPU powering the Stealth 18 HX AI is the Core Ultra 9 275AHX. This is the successor and the Arrow Lake family here. So this is the HX CPU, which is going to be about 55 watts. We get faster memory on board here, 32 gigabytes of RAM at 5600 mega transfers per second, 24 cores on that CPU. We also have an NPU on board, thus making this a Copilot Plus PC. And here you can take a look at an assortment of different benchmarks that I've conducted on this particular laptop. You can feel free to pause the video at any point to see a particular benchmark, but looking at the actual benchmarks here, whether it's Geekbench AI, or looking at the other stuff, wherever we're talking about CPU performance, you're not going to be starved for CPU performance from this particular chip. Despite not being hyper-threaded in 2025, the 24 cores are fast, and this thing can spin up to very high clock rates. That means you're going to get lots of throughput here, and it's going to be some of the class-leading power you're going to see in this particular segment, as the 275HX sits just slightly below the 285HX, which is the highest mobile processor from Intel this year for 2025 and the latest generation in the Arrow Lake series here. So this CPU is capable of pushing some very high wattages if you want to do just CPU only workloads. And that the added advantage of that is that if you're looking for a true desktop replacement and desktop level CPU performance, you're certainly gonna get that here with the MSI Stealth 18 HX AI. And I think that is beneficial for those of you who have entirely heavy workloads, or want to live an entirely laptop only life and want no slouch from your CPU. The Intel Core Ultra 9 275HX, boy, what a name, certainly delivers in that regard, and I don't think you're going to be complaining about CPU performance from this particular device. Talking about the gaming performance here of this particular laptop, with the RTX 5070 Ti capable of 140 watts at its total max power, you're going to get some very, very good and respectable gameplay and performance here. This is equivalent to what you would have seen around the 4080 from the last generation. Of course, with the same amount of VRAM as well at 12 gigabytes, you're going to be able to do 2K gaming quite comfortably with this 1600p display. I don't think you'll be starved for frame rates or low FPS in particularly any game, even the AAA titles and the latest generation games here. That said, this is Borderlands 3 running on this particular device, 1600p native resolution at the Ultra preset using DX11, and we're seeing here about 120 to 130 frames per second. I particularly like this particular benchmark because it pushes the GPU hard and because this game does not rely on any upscaling technology, it does not have either AMD or NVIDIA, and particularly not Intel's upscaling technology here, you're seeing raw performance from the GPU. And you can see here that it's pushing it right up to that 140 watts limit there, and we're getting some very respectable frame rates here from the DX11 benchmark here in this game. And our what is more impressive here though is that our lows. Our 1% lows, in order to give us a very smooth gameplay experience, despite of which game we're running, we want to see at least 60 FPS in that 1% low. And we can see here that this is comfortably keeping around 60 FPS, sometimes even far exceeding that, giving us some very smooth gameplay experience. That said though, I've tested lots of other games in a dedicated video. Please check out that link. It'll be shown at the end of the video here. If you're interested in other games and performance and how this laptop actually runs across a variety of games, you can check out that dedicated video on my channel here, and there you'll get a better semblance across a variety of different titles and a variety of different genres, so you can see how the 5070 Ti performs. Okay, so let's talk about the thermal performance of this laptop here. So here we are, we've been running a game for quite a while here. This is Hogwarts Legacy, and we'll talk about how the actual temperatures across the device look. So we're going to use our thermal imaging camera here to take a look at that device. And you can see here in the corner that the exhaust coming out of the device here is actually quite hot. It's spewing a lot of hot air this way, and of course along the sides, and of course along the back as well. And some of the heat exhausted along the back seems to be pooling up kind of towards the display panel here. I think that is a little bit concerning in terms of longevity, because these screens are quite sensitive. If there's glue materials here, perhaps that'll cause separation between the actual border that is attached here, the plastic boundary, and the bezel of the display. But that is something that will only be known with a long period of time. And if we look across the keyboard here, running in our extreme performance mode here using the MSI Center. So as we look here, extreme performance mode, and running with fan set to auto, we're seeing temperatures here, peak temperatures of about 62 degrees Celsius after a little while of gaming up at the top here. However, keep in mind that around the watch areas, it's nice and cool. It is warm to the touch, but it's certainly nowhere near that 62 degrees high temperature that we're seeing here. And across this center keyboard here, we're seeing about 52 degrees C. So this is one hot laptop, whether you like it or not. Now, if we turn it up to full fan or max fans mode by holding down function and pressing the up arrow key, we'll get this ridiculous amount of noise. And I think there may be some defect with this particular unit here, because we're getting this very, irritating and annoying sound. But if we do that, we see that the temperatures will start to drop slowly. Although this is, it takes quite a while. This laptop just runs very hot, which is very surprising considering that this is an 18-inch laptop. There's a very large chamber, vapor chamber in here, and that the 5070 Ti only maxes out at 140 watts. So as we can see here, that sound is quite annoying. So if you're playing games for a long period of time, that this is going to become a challenge. The heat, the ability for this laptop to disperse heat, it just seems, it's not what I would have expected from an 18-inch laptop. This is a large device. It has a very large vapor chamber, lots of copper and heatsink, etc. Plus, it has these two very large fans, which, as you heard, get very, very loud. And that means they can push a lot of air. But aside from that point, this device just is not able to keep this, the gaming and all of the components inside this in check. And I'm not overall very pleased with the thermal performance from the MSI Stealth 18 HX. And here we have Hogwarts Legacy running, and we're playing currently in the extreme performance mode. So let's look at what the fan noise is like. And then if we drop into balance mode, and finally we'll take a look at our eco mode here, which is silent. So keep in mind that eco silent basically less than halves the actual power wattage or power figures that are pushed to the actual 5070 Ti. So we go from 140 max down to just 60 watts. And then finally, we'll demonstrate max fans here. So you can press that by function and up arrow key. So nearly 62 decibels here in the actual max fans mode, which I think is just a crazy amount of noise, and nobody should ever be playing at that particular mode because this makes absolutely no sense. Despite that, you can get very good playable performance even in silent mode here. Now it's a little bit slow because sometimes when you toggle the different modes here and go down power levels from, for example, extreme down to the silent mode, you may need to restart your game so it can adjust to the new power level. I found that sometimes it takes a few minutes and sometimes it doesn't adjust correctly. I don't know if that's an issue with MSI Center or if just an issue with the game engine itself, that it's starved for power suddenly. As you can see, we're starting to see various texture pop in and additional effects from this game here because we've just reduced the power from 140 watts down to just 60 watts here in the silent mode. When you do restart, however, the game is playable at this frame rate or at this power level, excuse me, with about 60 watts of power. You can get 60 plus frames per second on the average frame rates in this game, varying between 60 and 80 depending on what's happening on screen. So it is playable on the 5070 Ti. It has enough CUDA cores and enough horsepower to be able to do that for you. And of course the machine will be nearly silent with the except of a little bit of a high-pitched sound from the actual fans in the MSI. I don't particularly like the MSI fans because of that high-pitched noise, and as you heard at max fans, it gets an absurdly loud. However, even if you're playing in the extreme performance mode, as long as you leave it set to auto fans, which by the way, you can go to the cog wheel here to configure. You can do your GPU overclocking here. And of course, you also have a fan speed here control where you can set it to auto, cooler boost, or you have advanced here where you can go and tweak the fan curves individually for the two large fans that are used for cooling in this device. So it's nice of MSI to give you that level of control. You can certainly sit here and tweak. But overall, the pitch of the sound of the fans in the MSI Stealth 18 and also other MSI devices I've tested is not the best for being able to be tolerable. And I've tested Asus, I've tested Gigabyte, I've tested a lot of other laptops. You know, by far MSI needs to get away from these types of fan tech and move to something that doesn't have this very high-pitched whirring sound. It is quite irritating, and I really hope that MSI does take this to heart and that in the coming year, 2026, we start to get a new fan design or new fan fins which will take us into a more software, whooshy kind of airflow feeling and sound that we had with devices such as the Zephyr 16 and even with the Omen Max 16 from this year. Okay, so verdict time. What is my final verdict on the MSI Stealth 18H HX AI for 2025 with the RTX 5070 Ti? Well, to be honest with you, I expected a lot more from this laptop. I had very high hopes, and I was quite hyped about this laptop and this form factor because it claimed to be the lightest 18-inch laptop in the world when it was released in the last year's first iteration, 18, with the Meteor Lake CPUs and I believe the 4080 and the 4090. That never came to Canadian shore, so I was finally able to get my hands on this particular year. And having tested this out, I've come away with mixed feelings and very hard time having a very hard time to recommend this laptop. The fan noise is atrocious, particularly if you play on max fans mode. As you saw in the thermals and the fan noise section of this video, it's just unbearable. However, you don't need to go to that noise level. You can play in the extreme performance mode or even in the balance mode with set to auto fans as I'm doing now, and you can get some incredible frame rates and incredibly smooth gameplay. However, the consequence of that is that the fans still have this very high-pitched noise, which is very different from the other manufacturers in the gaming laptops that I've tested, which makes it a little bit intolerable for many people, myself included, those who are sensitive to noise. The other question here is that this, despite being the lightest 18-inch laptop in the world, is actually quite heavy, and because of those rubber feet on the bottom that jut out way more than you would from traditional bottom rubber feet, it is actually not as is not as thin as they would claim to be. So that is another factor, and besides, 18-inch being as large as it is, it simply isn't there. What I would love to see for the next year's iteration is newer fans with a better fin design that does not create this high-pitched noise, the device that does not get this hot, despite having a vapor chamber in here and those two very large fans. We saw some very hot temperatures on this laptop. No matter how you cut it, this laptop just runs hot. That is the unfortunate reality. When you start to push 140 watts to 5070 Ti or a light GPU or even higher with the 5080 and 5090, and 50 to 60 watts to another CPU, you're getting between 200 to 250 watts of full power. And this device and this form factor, particularly laptops of this size, simply cannot cut it. And if you talk about battery life, well, it's better not anything be said about that, because with the estimates here, as you saw in the battery life section, with all of the little bells and whistles done, energy saver mode, brightness down to 50%, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth off, you're really getting only about 3 hours is the estimated time by Windows. In real life use, you're going to get anywhere between 2 to 3 hours of performance, because that 18-inch laptop screen takes a lot of juice, as do the other very high-end components that are contained in this laptop. If you perhaps set it to iGPU mode only, maybe you can eke out another 30 minutes to perhaps maximum another hour. So I just feel like there's a lot of compromises in this form factor, and considering these old bezels, this looks very, very old-fashioned compared to what you see from the Razer Blade 18 or some of the more modern design laptops. If they were to trim these bezels top and bottom here, bring the screen down, you would see that this is a lot more can be a lot more compact than even it is currently. Despite being the thinnest and the lightest laptop in the world for an 18-inch display size, I'm a little bit, at odds here as making a recommendation. So anyway, those are my thoughts about this laptop. The performance is great. The display is beautiful. I love the display. The thinness is acceptable. It can still fit into many 17-inch size bags for laptops, so that is an okay point there. However, I believe that there is still a lot of refinement to be had for the Stealth 18HX AI, as well as that name, not to mention, before this will, get my recommendation. Unfortunately, that is the state of affairs today, and that's what I have to say so far. So anyway, thanks very much for watching. I hope you really enjoyed this review. If you like my content, please click that like button, click the subscribe button, and click the notification bell so you're the first to know when there's new content available here. And as a disclaimer, this was purchased with my own money, but despite that, all of the thoughts you heard in this video, as always, were entirely my own, and nobody had access or review ahead of time of the content you found in this video. So thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.